In the early morning light of April 22, 1999, a quiet neighborhood in Gilroy, California, was about to become the setting for one of the most perplexing vanishings in recent memory. 73-year-old David Gonzalez, a retired agricultural worker, left his home with his small dog for a routine walk. It was a path he had taken countless times before, familiar sidewalks, open fields, and the distant hum of Highway 101. But on that day, David never returned. David was well known in his community, a man of steady habits, often seen greeting neighbors or tending to his modest garden. He had no known enemies, no financial troubles, and no reason to disappear. Yet within hours, his family realized something was wrong. The dog returned alone, leash still attached, trailing dust from the dry California ground. David was nowhere in sight. Authorities launched an immediate search. Volunteers combed the surrounding orchards, drainage ditches, and rural roads. Helicopters scanned the landscape from above. Police dogs followed faint scent trails, but they seemed to end abruptly, as though David had stepped off the earth itself. Over the following weeks, the case grew colder. There were no witnesses, no signs of struggle, no personal belongings left behind, except for his loyal dog's return. Investigators began to explore every possibility: a medical emergency, an accident, foul play, or even the unsettling idea that David had been taken somewhere far beyond the search grid. Rumors spread among locals. Some whispered about transient camps near the highway. Others recalled strange vehicles in the area in the days before his disappearance, but none of these leads ever developed into evidence. Years passed, and the orchards gave way to new housing developments. The landscape changed, but David's absence remained. His family kept his memory alive, still hoping for closure. The file stayed open in Gilroy's police department, a silent reminder of a case without resolution. What happened to David Gonzalez in those quiet morning hours? Was his disappearance the result of a hidden danger that passed unnoticed in the routine of daily life? Or does the answer lie somewhere no one has thought to look? Some mysteries fade with time. Others, like this one, remain suspended, waiting for the day when truth steps out from the shadows. On a warm summer afternoon in July 1997, the quiet mountain town of Lander, Wyoming, became the backdrop for a mystery that has endured for decades. 24-year-old Amy Rowe Bechtel, a competitive runner and newlywed, set out to prepare for an upcoming marathon. The Wind River Mountains rose in the distance, and the dirt roads and trails outside town offered both challenge and beauty, the kind of terrain Amy thrived in. That afternoon, she drove her white Toyota station wagon into the Shoshone National Forest area, presumably to scout a running route. Hours later, her husband, Steve Bechtel, returned home to find she hadn't come back. By evening, concern turned to alarm. Amy's car was discovered parked along Loop Road, keys still inside, alongside a notebook filled with running logs and training plans. There was no sign of a struggle, no disturbed earth, no personal belongings left scattered. It was as though she had stepped away for just a moment and never returned. The search was immediate and intense. Dozens of volunteers joined law enforcement, scouring the rugged trails, creeks, and dense forests. Helicopters circled above, while search dogs followed faint traces, all of which seemed to vanish in the thick wilderness. The terrain itself was a formidable adversary: steep drops, fast-moving water, and miles of remote land where a single wrong step could mean disaster. As days passed without results, theories began to diverge.
Some believed Amy may have encountered wildlife or suffered a fatal accident far from the trail. Others suspected foul play, pointing to the remote location and the eerie stillness surrounding her abandoned car. Her husband was questioned extensively, but never charged. Speculation swirled in the media and within the tight-knit community. In the years that followed, leads would surface, sightings, tips, even supposed confessions, yet none brought investigators closer to finding Amy. The mountains kept their silence, and the file remained open. Today, more than 2 decades later, Amy's disappearance continues to haunt the town of Lander. Her case has become part of local lore, a cautionary tale of how quickly the wilderness can swallow a person whole, or how a predator, human or otherwise, can strike in the most unexpected of moments. Somewhere in the endless sweep of Wyoming's backcountry, there may still be answers. But until they are found, Amy's story remains frozen in that summer day, a runner's path cut short, and a mystery without an ending. On a crisp autumn morning in November 2015, 78-year-old Tom Messick set out for what was meant to be a routine hunting trip in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. The forest, dressed in late-season gold and brown, stretched for miles, a landscape Tom knew well. He was an experienced outdoorsman, a veteran, and a survival instructor who had spent decades navigating wilderness terrain. That day, Tom and 6 companions ventured to the Lily Pond area near Brant Lake. The plan was simple. They would spread out in a line, each man stationed roughly 100 yards apart, while others drove deer toward them. Tom's position was near the end of the line, close to a logging road, a location chosen in part because of his age and a bad knee, making for an easier exit if needed. When the group reconvened a few hours later, Tom wasn't there. At first they thought he might have wandered slightly off position, but as minutes turned to hours, concern set in. Tom carried a rifle, walkie-talkie, and was dressed in camouflage, yet there was no response to calls, no sign of his passage, not even disturbed leaves or broken branches. The search was immediate and intense. Dozens of volunteers, state forest rangers, and trained search and rescue teams scoured the area. Helicopters scanned from above, infrared cameras swept the cold November woods, and divers searched nearby water. Yet, despite one of the most extensive manhunts in New York State history, not a single trace of Tom was ever found. No clothing, no gear, no footprints. The lack of evidence puzzled even the most seasoned searchers. If Tom had suffered a medical emergency, his body should have been found near his post. If he had wandered off, the dense but contained terrain should have yielded clues. Some began to wonder if something or someone had removed him from the area entirely. In the years that followed, theories have ranged from an accident in unseen terrain to a sudden animal encounter, even far stranger possibilities whispered among hunters and locals. But the forest has given no answers. Today, the disappearance of Tom Messick remains one of the most baffling missing person cases in the Adirondacks. For those who knew him, the image is hard to shake. A seasoned woodsman, waiting quietly on the edge of the forest, and then gone.
On August 7, 1988, Keith closed his shop for the day, telling friends he planned to hike to the top of Pendleton Mountain. He was in good spirits, dressed in casual hiking clothes, but he carried no backpack, no food, no water. Witnesses saw him walking toward the trail in the late afternoon. That was the last time anyone saw him. A search began almost immediately. Local volunteers, mountain rescue teams, and helicopters scoured the rugged slopes. But the Rockies are vast, and the weather can turn quickly. After a week, with no sign of Keith, the official search was called off. Not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint, not a clue has ever been found. Some believe Keith suffered a fatal fall or became lost in the wilderness.
Others suspect he staged his own disappearance, stepping into the story he had been writing. A few even whisper that something more sinister occurred, perhaps linked to the uncanny similarities between his life, his book, and Tom Young's fate. Today, more than 3 decades later, the mystery lingers in Silver Plume. In the shadow of Pendleton Mountain, locals still recall the summer when fact and fiction seemed to merge, and a writer, chasing a story, became part of one himself. On October 2, 1999, the quiet trails of Colorado's Roosevelt National Forest became the scene of a mystery that would haunt a family for decades. 3-year-old Jared Atadero was spending the weekend at the family-owned Poudre River Resort, a mountain retreat run by his father, Alan. That morning, a group of guests from the resort decided to hike the nearby Big South Trail, and Jared, full of boundless energy, wanted to go along. His father, thinking the hike would be short and supervised, agreed. But the Big South Trail is no casual walk. Winding deep into the Comanche Peak wilderness, it twists through dense pine forests, climbs rocky slopes, and skirts the rushing waters of the Poudre River. At some point during the hike, Jared ran ahead of the group, disappearing around a bend in the trail. When they reached that point moments later, he was gone. Panic spread quickly. The hikers searched the area, calling his name, but there was no response, only the sound of wind through the trees and the river below. Hours later, search and rescue teams arrived. Over the next several days, hundreds of volunteers, dog teams, and helicopters scoured miles of rugged terrain. Not a single trace of the boy was found. Theories began to form. Some believed Jared may have fallen into the river and been swept away. Others pointed to the area's population of mountain lions, noting predatory activity in the region. A few wondered if a human predator had taken him. But without evidence, each theory was speculation, and the forest kept its silence. 3 years later, in 2003, hikers made a discovery high on a steep hillside, far from where Jared was last seen. They found a small shoe, later confirmed to be his, in remarkably good condition, and a fleece jacket that appeared strangely untouched by years of exposure. Scattered nearby were partial remains. The location puzzled investigators. The terrain was treacherous, difficult even for adults to reach. Whether Jared climbed there on his own, was carried, or was the victim of something else entirely remains unknown. The condition of the clothing, the distance from the trail, and the lack of other evidence only deepened the mystery. Today, the Big South Trail is still open to hikers, but for those who know the story, it carries a shadow. Somewhere between the bends of that mountain path and the high slopes above, the truth of what happened to Jared Atadero waits, hidden in the quiet of the Colorado wilderness.
On the night of March 5, 1988, the small town of Chugiak, Alaska, lay beneath a heavy blanket of snow. 22-year-old Timothy Barnes was at home, spending a quiet evening with his family. Described as kind, responsible, and dependable, Timothy had plans for the future and no known reason to leave without telling anyone. But sometime after midnight, something drew him out into the frigid darkness, and he never came back. In the morning, his car was still in the driveway, his wallet and identification inside the house. There were no signs of a break-in, no indications of a struggle. What was missing was Timothy himself, and whatever had compelled him to step outside into sub-zero temperatures wearing only light winter clothing. The search began almost immediately. Friends, neighbors, and Alaska State Troopers combed the surrounding area on foot, by snowmobile, and from the air. Snowy fields, frozen creeks, and dense spruce forests were searched for days, but the fresh snow that fell that night left little to no trace of footprints or tracks. It was as though Timothy had simply walked into the Arctic night and vanished. Rumors began to circulate in the tight-knit community.
Some suggested he might have suffered from a sudden mental health crisis or sleepwalking episode. Others wondered if he had been lured outside by someone he knew, perhaps a knock at the door or a car pulling up in the early hours. With no evidence, every theory remained speculative. Weeks turned into months. Spring came, melting the snow and revealing the ground beneath, but still there was no sign of Timothy. No clothing, no personal effects, no remains. Authorities expanded the search radius, even considering the possibility he had been taken far from the area. More than 3 decades later, his disappearance remains one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries in Alaska's Matanuska-Susitna Valley. For Timothy's family, the absence of answers is a wound that time has not been able to close. What happened that freezing night? Did Timothy leave willingly, step outside to meet someone, or did an unseen danger approach the safety of his home? The quiet streets of Chugiak hold no clues, only the memory of a young man who vanished into the cold, leaving behind questions that may never be answered.
On July 10, 2015, a small family camping trip in the mountains of Idaho turned into one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in recent memory. 2-year-old Dior Kuntz Jr., known to everyone as Little Man, was on a weekend outing with his parents, his great-grandfather, and a family friend. The destination was Timber Creek Campground, a remote site in the Salmon Chalice National Forest, a rugged landscape of thick pines, steep hillsides, and icy streams. By late morning, the group had set up camp. According to his parents, Dior was playing between them and his great-grandfather's trailer, moving in and out of sight as the adults busied themselves. At some point, they realized they could no longer see him. What began as a quick look around the site turned into a frantic search. Within an hour, emergency crews were on the scene. Search and rescue teams scoured the immediate area, calling the boy's name and searching under logs, brush, and boulders. Helicopters circled overhead, and divers searched nearby Timber Creek. Tracking dogs were brought in but seemed unable to pick up a consistent scent trail. The landscape itself was dangerous for a child: fast-moving water, uneven terrain, and wild animals. Yet despite exhaustive searches over the following days, no clothing, no toys, and no remains were ever found. It was as if Dior had simply vanished. Investigators considered every possibility. Could he have wandered into the woods and succumbed to the elements? Was he taken by a wild animal? Or, as some began to suspect, did something happen within the group that was not being told? Conflicting accounts from the adults present added to the mystery, and over time, suspicion shifted toward the family. Still, no charges have ever been filed, and no physical evidence has surfaced to confirm any theory. Years later, the campsite remains eerily unchanged. The same trailers, the same fire pit, the same stretch of wilderness that swallowed a little boy without a trace. For searchers who've walked those woods, the absence of clues is perhaps the most unsettling detail of all. Somewhere in the Timber Creek area, the truth of what happened to Dior Kuntz Jr. may still be hidden, buried beneath pine needles, carried downstream, or locked in the memories of those who were there. Until that truth emerges, the mountains will continue to hold their silence.
On September 7, 1997, 73-year-old John Devine set out into Washington's North Cascades for what was meant to be a challenging but familiar hike. An avid outdoorsman despite his age, John was known for tackling steep, difficult trails, the kind that demand both experience and endurance. That day, his goal was to summit Vesper Peak, a rugged mountain known for its breathtaking views and unpredictable weather. Friends say John was well prepared. He carried food, water, and gear, and had hiked the area many times before. Yet when evening came and he didn't return, concern quickly turned to alarm. A search was launched the following morning, bringing in dozens of rescuers, helicopters, and tracking teams. The weather, however, was against them. Heavy rain and low clouds moved in, drenching the steep slopes and reducing visibility. Despite this, the search pressed on for days, until tragedy struck. A helicopter assisting the effort crashed in the mountains, killing 3 search and rescue volunteers. The loss was devastating, and with worsening weather, the search was scaled back. No sign of John was ever found. Not a piece of clothing, no camping gear, no remains. It was as if the mountain had swallowed him whole. In the years that followed, theories circulated. Some believed he may have fallen into one of the area's hidden crevasses or down a sheer cliff, his body concealed by rock and snow. Others wondered if the storm had played a larger role, obscuring evidence and erasing any trail he left behind. A few even speculated that John might have chosen to vanish, though friends and family rejected the idea, pointing to his love of the outdoors and his close ties to home. Today, Vesper Peak still draws hikers and climbers, but for those who know the story, the mountain is a place of dual memory, a destination of beauty and the site of 2 linked tragedies: the disappearance of an experienced hiker and the loss of those who tried to find him. The North Cascades are vast and unforgiving, and somewhere within their steep ridges and hidden valleys, the final chapter of John Devine's story remains unwritten, a mystery held tight in the silence of the high country. On a chilly February evening in 1997, the small town of Bismarck, North Dakota, was winding down for the night. 54-year-old Chester Chet Hansen, a retired truck driver known for his easygoing nature and strong work ethic, was last seen leaving a local bar after meeting with friends. It was a short drive home, just a matter of minutes, but somewhere along that route, Chet vanished. The next day, his truck was found abandoned on a rural road outside of town. The driver's side door was unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. There were no signs of a struggle inside the cab, no footprints leading away in the snow, and no indication of mechanical trouble. It looked as though Chet had simply stepped out for a moment and disappeared into the winter night. Family and friends quickly reported him missing, and the search began. Law enforcement officers, local volunteers, and tracking dogs combed the area on foot and by snowmobile. Helicopters scanned the frozen fields and wooded edges. The temperatures that week had dropped well below freezing, making survival without shelter highly unlikely. Yet no trace of Chet was found. Investigators began to explore possible explanations. Was this a case of foul play? Had Chet encountered someone he knew or someone dangerous on his way home? Could he have suffered a sudden medical emergency, wandered into the dark, and become lost in the snow? The fact that his vehicle was found in working order, with valuables left inside, complicated the picture. Weeks passed, then months. Rumors began circulating. Sightings in nearby towns, whispers of deaths, and speculation about whether Chet might have chosen to leave. But none of these leads ever panned out, and there was no evidence to suggest he had planned to disappear. To this day, Chet Hansen's case remains open, a mystery suspended in the icy quiet of a North Dakota winter. His family has never stopped hoping for answers, holding on to the belief that somewhere, someone knows what happened that night. The abandoned truck still stands in their memory, a frozen snapshot of the moment when an ordinary evening took an extraordinary turn and a man's life slipped into the unknown.
In October 2018, The rugged expanse of the Selway-Bitterroot wilderness in Idaho became the setting for a disappearance as vast and puzzling as the land itself. Connie Johnson, a 74-year-old experienced outdoorswoman, had spent decades navigating the mountains. She worked as a cook and camp caretaker for hunting outfitters, often living for weeks in remote backcountry camps far from roads and towns. The wilderness was her element. That fall, Connie was stationed at a remote hunting camp near Moose Creek, deep in the forest, accessible only by horseback or on foot. On October 2nd, her fellow camp members left for the day's hunt, leaving Connie behind to tend the camp. When they returned, she was gone. At first, they assumed she had stepped out to gather firewood or take a short walk. But as daylight faded and the temperature dropped, worry set in. The next morning, search and rescue teams arrived, launching an operation across miles of steep ridges, tangled undergrowth, and cold, fast-moving streams. Helicopters scoured the tree canopy, and ground teams called her name through the thick wilderness. There was no sign of Connie, no footprints, no dropped gear, no trail leading away from camp. Her beloved border collie, Ace, was also missing. Days later, Ace appeared near a remote road miles away, thin but alive. Searchers hoped the dog might lead them back to Connie, but he seemed unable or unwilling to retrace his steps. Theories began to emerge. Some believed Connie had become disoriented and wandered too far from camp, succumbing to exposure in the unforgiving terrain. Others suggested she might have encountered wildlife or suffered a sudden medical emergency. And a few couldn't shake the feeling that her disappearance in such a remote and familiar place was something stranger, perhaps even involving another person. Despite weeks of effort, the search was eventually called off with no trace found. For those who knew her, the idea that a woman so skilled in survival could vanish without leaving a clue is the most haunting detail of all. Today, the Selway-Bitterroot remains unchanged. The same silent forests, the same endless ridges. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, the answer to what happened to Connie Johnson still lies hidden, guarded by the land she loved so much.